My name is Kathy Tovar. I'm the president of the Software Industry Steering Group, and I would like to start by welcoming all of you to this panel event discussion today. This event is sponsored by the Software Innovation Group, ICTA. Our aim as a group is to provide students with hands-on experience in the IT industry. So I would like to invite all of you to register in our website. Currently we have job opportunities for registered member only. If you want to know what the group does, please come and see me after this event. Without any further delays, I would like to introduce our moderator, Professor Anthony Tan.
Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'd like to extend my warm welcome to all of you. Today, the panel discussion is about IT job roles in the industry, and it's our pleasure to have 5 experts in the IT industry to come and talk to us. Now, today we're going to talk about 5 different job roles: project manager, business analyst, architect, enterprise architect, a developer, and a tester. Now, invariably, when you go out to the industry and work in an IT, you will do some of the activities in these job roles. In large projects or large organizations, some job roles are very well defined, but in other projects and other organizations, a person may be doing a few job roles at the same time, like you develop, you test, and you design. So today we're going to hear from our experts about these job roles. First of all, I'd like to extend my warm welcome to our panelists. Thank you for coming to join us. Michelle Mark is from SMS Technology, and she'll talk about project manager role. Alison McCall from Object Mastery. Rian Postma from the ANZ Bank. Heidi Mulaba from KL Data Security. And Aaron Huang from Swinburne University. Let them introduce themselves about what they do and talk about the job roles. Without further delay, Michelle.
Thanks, Anthony. So my role at SMS, heading up the program project services practice, is really about put a team, and most of them are project managers, program managers, project office professionals. And so what I look after there is make sure that our team delivers quality results for our clients. So our clients are mainly Australian companies, such as banks, telcos, mining companies, and so forth. And in addition to that, in my spare time, I also sit on 2 company boards, and currently just started a PhD with Swinburne as well on my own. So that's my background. Amongst that time in different consulting firms, and the latest being SMS, I have managed a number of projects, programs, and portfolios, but my role today is talk about project management. I've had a think about the last few projects I've managed just for about a few years. I think the role itself is a very diverse and challenging one. It's one where you're managing outcomes, you're managing delivery to a particular personal business, and what you have to do there is ensure that end-to-end your project delivers what's originally intended. So what are those things that are in the scope of your project? Scope is very important. One of the key skills required as a project manager is stakeholder management and communication. So making clear as to how you manage a team to deliver, but also managing up and outside of your project, setting the right expectations around what are you doing, how are you going against that, setting the right expectations. So quite a challenging role, which in some cases has a technology component, and in most of the roles I've been in, mostly non-technology skills are required. Business skills as well as management skills.
Hi, my name is Alison, and I work with Object Mastery, which is a software development company. We do software development for the financial services industry. We have about 65 software developers. And as general manager of my role, I oversee the company, which includes the administration functions and BI functions, software development, building management, fund, parties, whatever you like. My background was in project management, and prior to that I was in the role of business analyst, and I have dabbled in testing over the years as an expert end user in various environments. My role now really taps into all of the skills that I've learned and an ability to understand the process and what our staff are doing. So key to understanding, effectively training the company to understand at a pretty detailed level what the job is at hand. Today I'm playing the role of a business analyst, and each of our roles plays a pretty important part in the deployment of good solutions. If you think about a project, it usually starts off with a very general idea. It could to be create a new CRM, it could to be create a new funds management system, a new web. And somebody in management often comes up with a very broad concept. Somewhere between the inception of an idea to the testing, it has to go from the general to the specific. The BA involvement is that first real go at taking it from the general to the specific. That's how I've always seen it. They have to be able to, the business tend not to think in the level of detail that's often needed to help these guys actually make something and test it to see if it does what it's meant to do. So that business analysis is really about trying to tease out when the business says this, okay, we can understand more about that. What does that mean? In what circumstances? All the time? Some of the time? Never? Anytime you hear a business person say always, that's a lie. And whenever you hear mostly, that's a red flag to say, okay, then there's a lot of detail in there. So it's very much in tune with the language that people are using and getting to understand the business process. That's not their strength. So somewhere between there and there, it's about trying to break that down and translate that such that the developers who desperately need detail can actually start to make something. So that's my hat today.
Excellent. Reinforcement. I'm today an architect representing the role. Just a quick background about me. I'm currently Chief Architect for the ANZ Bank Group. As you probably know ANZ, hopefully all of you. We operate in 35 countries. I look after all the enterprise architects across the group, which includes all the various disciplines, anything from application architecture through to security architecture, through to information architecture, infrastructure architecture. ANZ being a large corporation, not typically like a small one, typically end up specialising quite a lot. And so we've got quite deep specialisation in these various areas and industries. It also goes from big group, looking at the group, 35 countries, down to country level, down to application level. So the architecture profession in a bank like ANZ typically goes down quite a few levels. We start with something we call enterprise architecture. In there, the various disciplines, and underneath that, we've got something also called solution architecture. If I have to sort of explain the role of architects, I want to sort of use the analogy around town planning. Okay? If you think of Melbourne typically, Melbourne has got everything from manufacturing to schooling to residential areas to CBD. Those are all the areas, if you think of an organisation or a company, that you need to think about the interaction where things are placed. Right, you're not going to put a manufacturing plant right next to and residential, then another manufacturing plant and then residential. You're going to structure things in a well-sequenced way. The roads and infrastructure is very much from you, like the infrastructure portion around that, not your hardware, your networks, the piping, the electricity goes and things like this, okay? And then each building is also architected. If you take our beautiful buildings in our CBD or a house, all of them are architected. So that for me is really much the solution architecture component associated with that. So within the overall town plan, we said this is where manufacturing will take place or production. This is where the residential areas will be, and each house is architected. Each house is planned, designed, it fits within the overall structure of the urban plan as well. So within my role, and if I take the analogy from the business analyst to the projects that we do, each project tries to create something, tries to solve a problem, either something that's existing or something new. And the architect's role is typically to take the requirements and translate that typically from something what we call conceptual, something vague, okay, down to something more logical and physical, okay. Once we've done that conceptual sort of architecture where it fits in, and we take a lot of things in consideration. We take in consideration, for example, it might be in an existing residential area, okay, and there are rules and structures and things associated with that. We typically call those things standards and things that we need to apply. So we can architect a house in the context of that existing plan. If it's a brand new residential area, I'm going to have a very different role, okay? And we might think a bit broader in that context, so taking the project, the requirements from the business and design something brand new in that context as well, okay? And typically our artifacts, everything that we do in this context is to make sure that we fit with the business, make sure we get the outcomes. We look at the broader organization and make sure we also get those outcomes. And then very critical, we hand over to the developers in this context. I'm
Heidi Mulbach. So I'm currently working for a very new startup, KL Data Security. So the company was started in January this year. It started by, I guess, essentially venture capitalists bought the IP of a previously failed startup, and I also worked for that previous startup. So I was brought in because I acknowledged the intellectual property of the old startup that they bought. So because we're very new, we're also very small. We currently have 3 staff. Doing one more on Monday, starting on Monday. Prior to that, the previous startup I was working for was Wikipedia. We had 15 people. There were 6 developers in that company. And then prior to that, I was actually working for a very large company. I was working for Sales Technologies, so I know you have heard of that company. So I guess my experience varies very much from a very large company to an extremely small company. And as a representing the developer role in those different sized companies, so in a large company like CA, I guess the flow tends to be more along the lines of what Michelle Allison and Brianna just described, where you have a fairly structured way of getting from inception down to actual development and then eventually QA. But in a very small company, the developer tends to be responsible for everything. You just get thrown a concept, and the developer is responsible for fleshing that out into some actual real functional requirement, and then actually coding it up, and sometimes even having to test their own QA their own work, so then you have the QA person there. So I guess the developer they're very much the coalface. They're the ones creating the software, writing the software, and I guess they're ultimately responsible for getting the whole thing actually really working. So there's usually a lot of interaction from the developer back to the architect and even the business analyst. Usually one question when you come down to trying to actually implement something that's been specified. It's quite often it's not clear enough. So you've got to go back up the pipeline and then it comes back down again. So, and then once you've got all of that done, you then go on to QA, and hopefully QA has also been part of that whole fleshing out process as well, so everything's on into then. So, hand over to QA.
Yeah. I'm Aaron Wang from Swinburne ITS. I suppose most of you guys are from Swinburne in the staff of students, but I'm sure you don't know what service ITS provided and how ITS operates. So I will start with some background information of ITS first. ITS basically look after all the core business applications, infrastructure, include data center, servers, network, telephony, and also desktop support, help desk, field technicians. All these components are operated by ITS. The group I work in look after all the core business functions, business applications for Swinburne, which include learning management system, you use everyday Blackboard, student management system, student one, student portal, also library system, HR system, finance system, all the components Swinburne part, we look after it. And recently, we also introduced the integration platform. We use the ESP to connect all the parts together to give students a gateway to access all the applications in a consistent feeling. Talking about the test roles have different ways to do things. According to the nature of the project, for example, if we implement vendor product or a vendor product upgrade, for example, Blackboard have a new version. Before we implement that new version, we need to do a thorough regression testing, make sure the new feature works correctly, make sure the bug has been fixed, make sure the old existing functions works, make sure that the related third-party plugins, integration points, all this part works. That's the traditional testing for vendor product. The typical process: test case design, execution, and reporting. And we also have an in-house development product, for example, student portal. In that process, testers are embedded with the whole development process. We use a test-driven development approach. We interpret BA's request as user stories. User story is something like, given a situation, when you do something, then you expect to see some results. Given you log into Swinburne portal, when you click the student one link to my study plan, then you expect to see my results come out. So that is a typical user stories, and we try to automate that story. Functional testing uses Selenium. Another tip is quality is for everyone, not QA team look after quality. Everyone look after quality, especially developers, architectures, everyone look after quality. For example, developers write using a test case before they check in their code into repository subversion. We automatically run the test case first. If not passed, they cannot check in their code into repository. So that's the QA part we put into the whole system. I have been a guest lecturer here for several subjects like software reliability and testing, software testing automation. Someone student asked me how to be a good tester. Is a student tester or failed developer become tester? A tester is not an interim job or starting up job. It's a specialized role to do. You can do traditional testing work, but if you're not a good developer, you cannot be if you failed in development, you definitely will fail in testing. And the tester can have different specialized roles, for example, performance testing and also penetration testing. Performance testing, for example, we want to check if the system can handle the peak traffic. In Swinburne, as an example, peak traffic will be class registration. Everyone can fighting for the suitable time for their class. Or results release, everyone wants to see their results sooner. So this will test all these peak hours. And also penetration testing, make sure no one can hack into a system change your results, right? And also other privacy issues. That's about it.
Well, I guess it's time for us to ask our panelists some questions. I'll start with Michelle first. Michelle, as a project manager, you have to build a budget. You have to justify to management that that this project is going to be all good and deliver in a certain amount of time, within budget, and so on and so forth. Now, at the time when you start planning on the budget and working on the budget, you don't have all the details. How do you manage that?
Good question. Get that asked all the time because usually in a project when you start, it was mentioned that there's usually a lot of missing detail. It starts with an idea or a problem, and you don't have time to flesh it out. The sponsor or the business unit says, "Give me a figure. Give me the figure now. How much will it cost? How long will it take?" And maybe all you've got is some whiteboard drawing or half an hour briefing. And usually the job is expectation management. So if you're pressed to give an answer, you do have to provide, I think, a qualified answer. But also it's the way in which you do that because there is a journey with the project as you go down the project life cycle. You find out more as you go. And you may have heard there are different methodologies that you can use. You can use an agile methodology, you can use a classical waterfall methodology. There are different ways around that because what you could do is you could use what we call agile, which means that you only do what you can and you find out as you go. So your parameters do move. You can fix certain things. So for example, if you fix time, well, we have to make a change and compromise with scope. If you fix scope, then you have to compromise on other things, for example. But it is about getting the team involved. The project manager doesn't have all the answers. It's not expected that we have all the answers because the team, we had particular specialisation in analysis, in development, in the architect, or in whatever solution you're asked to provide, have expertise to try and actually flesh out all the detail. When the pressure's on to provide the answer, I think you can provide the time frame that you can come back with the answer by consulting with the team or really find out what's required to get a good estimate. So a lot of it is in the way that you communicate and you set those expectations, and sometimes shit happens. That's the reality of projects. And it's about being transparent. When that happens, it's not about hiding that. Not everyone knows all the answers. All the experts in the room, something that you didn't expect could happen. And that's where you have risk management. That's why you build this contingency as you can, as much as possible. So those different scenarios, you can anticipate as much as you can, but sometimes that thing that was almost impossible blows up and happens and will blow your budget or your project, whatever. It is about then communicating that and managing that with the team.
Interesting, you mentioned about the use of agile development methodology where you kind of continuously deliver. But I would like to pass that to Rian because you work with architecture. Architecture by definition is infrastructure, is long-term, is big, is all that. How does that work?
There's two dimensions for us typically. The first dimension is to understand more in context to the organization or the over outcome. If it's now a startup or a large organization like ANZ, where they're trying to go. So the first thing that we typically try and do is establish sort of what we call a roadmap, a view for how we're going to go from A to B. And that B typically is, I call it a bit of a waffle, okay? 5 years, no one knows really what's going to happen in 5 years. Does anyone know where they're going to be in 5 years? So you've got almost an idea where you want to aim, and that's a small dot on the radar or somewhere in the future. And then as we get closer, in terms of 4 years, 3 years, we get a much better idea of the things that we want to build. Okay? If I take all the disciplines, everything from application to infrastructure to security to information, and I apply that over that lens, I start getting an idea of all the building blocks that we need to do in order to hit that goal. And that goal is typically a business goal or the outcome that we want. In between what happens each year, the project starts and stops. We get ideas, things get added to the mix, okay? And as we add things to the mix, we've got a general idea where we want to go, the things that we need to do in order to get there, okay? We call these typically, as I mentioned earlier, building blocks, okay? And then we slot these projects into these building blocks, I'm trying to say, and now it doesn't matter for me if I've got, so that well-planning allows me to be more agile in terms of actually the things that I can do or change. If I know I'm dependent on this thing in order to get here, okay, and then the project or the outcome wants to get on the right, I know I need to do this thing first. I can communicate that to the project, I can communicate that to the business, and they can either say the scope of that project now includes this other component as well. Okay? There's no way I'm going to build an internet banking website without the security components, for example. Okay? We know we need to fix that, for example. Okay? And so we need to add the security component to the mix as well. And that gives us a lot more flexibility. So architecture in the one dimension is very much around planning, okay? Allowing us the flexibility to actually execute and change the direction we want to go. It's almost like a project plan for me. If you've got a project plan, it's actually quite a good baseline, okay, in terms of the steps that you need to do. So if you want to change something, you can actually test what's going to happen if I change one or two of these steps, okay? You can change my cost dimension, you can change my time dimension, quality as well, okay? And that's the same with architecture and stuff. It's about that planning discipline that allows us to be agile and allows us to be more flexible as well, okay? Without a good plan, you're just about shooting in very different directions, correct?
Yeah, so on one hand, you provide the maximum flexibility in an architecture to support the core business functions. On the other hand, with the business users not knowing, understanding technology and architecture, business analysts, let's say, Alison, how do you work with your users and explain to them, hey, there is an architecture and inherently certain constraints to what can be implemented. How do you translate that?
I think that the key is to not get yourself into the situation where you're having to explain some of those constraints. The key in a BA role is to focus on tell me what you need to be able to do. Tell me what the problem is, because the minute they get stuck in trying to understand what the solution is, things start to fall apart a little bit because they don't actually have the context both on in the development stage or at the architecture stage. So it's always about tell me what you need to be able to do. When you take the conversation back to tell me what the business problem is, and understanding that, my experience is that you tend to not have conversations that get into technical detail that is going to be difficult unless you start to go back to basics. Having said that, there are going to be times where you may encounter situations where there is a constraint, and you've just got to do your best to be able to, restate that in a way that can get traction in the business. And again, you don't do anything in isolation. So in a situation where I might be getting feedback from this side that there are conflicts, constraints with what I'm sort of feeding there, that's when you engage with public management. Because again, it's stakeholder management, it's all of those relationship issues, and again, you've got a team that can help you in regard to that if you do need to actually try and push back on what those technical constraints are.
Because I think we have to remember that projects don't live in isolation. Projects are still living within an organisation, and an organisation still needs to run the business, it still needs to bring in the money, the profits, and projects should help the organisation and be part of that, because even when projects finish, that thing that project's going to build or change will continue to be part of that organisation. So some of it is about remembering you've got the broader organisation that you're part of, and not just, I think, a thing on the side. And that's where you can leverage other stakeholders in the mix, even outside the project team, because what the system you're touching or whatever you're building probably has a general management owns that amongst other things, and those other things could be a constraint. And still be one boss that can actually resolve each of them, as an example. So don't try and solve everything within the project team is something part of that process.
Michelle just said something which is really important, that the business is actually running a business, and that's one of the problems I have today, is trying to get them to be able to dedicate the appropriate amount of time and consideration to this new thing, or this, when they say go fix something, they just want you to go fix it. They don't want to necessarily know the details. They want you to have magic. And so you're going and trying to carve out time in their day when they've already got a job to do in their mind. I'm already doing something over here. And even though this might be hugely beneficial, it's that they just want you to take their pain away. But we can't do that without their engagement. We can't do it successfully that delegation.
And it's also one of the things that we've seen change in architecture over the period as well. In the past, when I started out, I was called a technical architect, very much just application. And over the period, we've been introducing concepts like business architecture to the mix. Okay? And the reason for that introduction is that we've been trying to get better at the language, okay? And better in terms of describing it actually in their language as well. Because there's not everyone's going to be a technical person that understands the detail around the technical components associated with it. And in reality, even today, and I want to throw a bit of a different view in there as well, if you look today at organizations as well, even a company like ANZ, technology is becoming actually quite a core piece of the organization. So the differentiation for me between business and technology is disappearing very fast. Okay? If you look at the languages that we start to use, everything from all the things that we've learned over time, disciplines from a project manager, that those same disciplines are building their way upwards into the business side of things as well. If I take our digital business, for example, at the bank, for example, for me that is 99.99% technical. It is truly a digital. If you think of a digital bank, there's actually very few business components. There might be a bit of marketing on the side, a bit of PR and a few other things, but mostly that's a technical. And we've seen a lot of the technical people also going into the business components.
So it's like an enabler. It's kind of like an accounting. People don't think about accountants behind the organization. It's just part of the business. I like to ask Heidi. You are kind of at the later stages of an IT development. I mean, you get requirements and you get things written down for you. People tell you things, and then you go and develop. How do you find that information? Do you always get accurate information?
Yes.
She's going to say yes.
I will tell you something, and business analysts will tell you other things, and project manager will say, do it tomorrow.
Yesterday.
Exactly. How did you manage that?
So, contrary to what these people are saying, generally detailed enough or accurate enough in the first delivery, but the idea is to work with the other people as a team and get more detail on the things that you can't do. And sometimes it's not until you actually sit down and actually try to I guess, come down with very low level requirements to write code that you realise that there's actually a few steps missing. Something wasn't quite thought through, that it's still a bit too vague, and at that point you have to go back and get clarification on that. Sometimes even go back to the proposal. Sometimes that's best to go back to the proposal as to how to solve the problem, and then push that back up through the levels. So yeah, I guess that's probably my experience, is that it's not always all that accurate. It depends as well on I guess how the architect comes up with their solution. Some architects are actually very yeah, that's right. Some architects are very hands-on, and they may actually define the architecture by actually providing pseudocode or even an initial beta coding just to give the general idea, and then that's the way of defining the architecture, is they throw it over the fence and the developer fills it out. So that way they've got a fairly detailed and even framework to start working with. Other times the architect is very much just a paper architect, just writing documents, coming up with use cases, workflows, that kind of thing on a technical level. And in that case, my experience is tend to find there are more gaps.
I can add to that. I think in the context of my background as well, I've been a developer for a very long period. Okay? sort of worked my way up that stack in terms of understanding development, doing anything from infrastructure to information to security, ended up being an architect. And the benefit from going through that sort of career progression up to the architecture side of things was that you do get an appreciation for what's actually required. And Adi is 100% right in the context that sometimes we define architecture up here somewhere in the clouds, okay? And that gap between actually doing something and what's actually required is a big gap. So in typically most of the methodologies you'll see that they do something called conceptual down to logical down to physical. And as you define it through those steps, before you even start coding, you need to go through all those motions, literally, okay? So in order to get something where you actually write a piece of code, okay? It's not just starting writing the code, you need to think of all the things all the way through that. And the architect plays a role up to a certain point, and it depends on the organization. I mentioned earlier, small organizations, you tend to be the architect, the designer, and the developer. Okay? And the business analyst. So you tend to, and it's much easier to do the things in your mind, but there's always good disciplines in documenting things through those stages. It's always good to have a project, document requirements, document the design, and then actually go. And in large organizations, they tend to build on specialization, but it's always a team event. Always in that context.
In some large organisations, you can actually get to the architect level without having been a developer at all. And I guess those type of architects, they tend to be very much the on-paper architect, and they tend to sometimes missing the steps, or they don't quite think through the problem in the same way as someone who's had the actual development experience. So they're more likely to have the bits missing, or there'll be a lot more technical issues in their architectures than there will be in someone who's been hands-on and been in the code for some time.
How Sweden ITS will solve this issue? Actually, I'm managing a development team about the 10 permanent staff and the 3 consultants and the ideal students as well. Actually, my team includes the solution architect, developers, and the testing testers as well. So when I hire solution architect, not enterprise architect, is the first, not only can you video, you can coding as well. So once you design something, we will need to check, is this pattern we used before? Is something new? If we find something new, we never implemented this way before, we will do prototype. We'll do the end-to-end trial to see if this way works or not. Like recently, we implemented a BPM system, and this BPM system has a front end already, but we found that's not the best way to do it. The solution architect say, because this BPM system is completely API driven, you can have another system to look after the UI part. We haven't never done this before. That's sounds beautifully from talking architecture-wise, but we never tried before. So once before we implement, accept that, we need to do the trial first.
So it's a way of managing risks.
That's right.
That's what you're saying. So how is risk managed throughout the entire development process, either business analysis or enterprise architecture? When you draw something down, how do you manage that risk that it's going to work?
I think the single most important thing that any part of this process has to do to manage risk is there's 2 key elements. One is the identification of risk. Some people are just better at than others. Some people are risk-averse and are able to identify that's a weak point. For whatever reason, it could be a weak point because of resourcing. It could be a weak point because of technology not being tried and tested. So the first thing is having the right people involved who can actually identify what risks there are. The second thing is communication. It's all very well if you can see that there's a risk, but if you keep that to yourself, there's no risk management. And so communication and collaboration become the overlay, the oil in which the machine is absolutely dependent upon for success. And it's interesting because there's 2 models, 2 extremes, as I say. There's one where there's 5 distinct roles within the process, and then there are others where the one person plays that role. And that, in our organisation, that's what we have. We don't have 5 roles, we have people doing the whole show. Both of them rely on collaboration and communication, but for slightly different reasons. Where you've got 5 people doing it, we have to understand where each of us is at and what the needs are to be able to effectively iterate and move between and find out what the needs are. It is easier when it's all in one head. However, when you are working within one head, you have blind spots that you don't even know about. And so you have to collaborate just as much using other peers, team leaders, project experienced people to try and get it outside your head so you're saying it out loud and identifying the risks and opportunities along the way. So the collaboration and communication is equally important when you're managing risk, whether you're doing that or 5 individuals, but it is identification, and some people are just better than others, and then encouraging communication so that each person within their scope knows what the risks are, and they can sometimes manage that within the scope of their role, but then identifying this has the potential to affect somebody else. I now need to make sure they know that's something that could affect them.
I'll probably take that communication piece one step further in that work effectively as a team or as an individual. There's a piece around taking ownership and accountability. So I've been in a number of situations where risks are called out as more of a back covering exercise. Hey, there's a risk and we better deal with this. But nowhere is there that, let's talk about, well, how are we going to address this risk? How are we going to do it in terms of, is it a team effort? Is it, we've got to escalate it to the sponsor, has to remove a roadblock? So being quite specific to take that one step further, because at the end of the day, if the project's not successful, it's not an individual's fault. It's the team that's not delivering the project. And part of it is not being able to effectively identify and addressing those risks as you go through the project lifecycle. Because risks are inherent in projects, not just in projects but in everyday life, but it's about actually identifying and addressing them effectively and anticipating, because in an experienced project team you would see certain projects, you see those risks come up time and time again. Of course you might be blindsided with some you don't foresee, but anticipating and dealing with those, actually embedding some of those in the way that you manage the project as part of the way that you do things is really part of it. And I think what you mentioned earlier, quality as an example, always a risk, and usually left to the last minute. Oh, the testers will pick it up. Obviously they didn't. Oh well, no, they failed, right? That's not the case.
That's why we're all agile today.
Agile, that's right. Actually, the user didn't pick it up.
We tested before we even write it.
Exactly, that's right. Well, the user didn't pick it up. It's all your fault. You're paying for it. So that shift, it is about that. It is about the accountability and ownership of that. That goes a long way towards addressing this.
That's certain attributes that is not really about a software development about the software development process. It is personal attributes that perhaps our young audience here needs to learn, to how to listen, how to
what can go wrong?
What can go wrong?
There's a mindset of what can go wrong. Some people just walk, get up every morning and plan for what could go wrong. And at this end, they don't leave the house because so many things can go wrong between now and then. But most people have a normal management of that, of what possibly could go wrong. I've got to be here for an interview. What could go wrong? If the rain's come down, so maybe I won't catch the train because it's started on data. Maybe I'll take my time. Some people again naturally think like that, but where it's not second nature, it's almost like you have that work there, have it written down somewhere. What could go wrong? Because that's considering and then being able to plan for the eventuation of that.
Yeah, so by the time when Aaron detects that something has gone wrong, it might be too late. You can't change the architecture. You can't change, go back to the board and say, sorry, I can't deliver this year. Maybe 2 years later, as my key system.
What tends to, in my experience with some very large projects, what tends to happen, what has happened, and does happen, is that by the time it gets to that end of the process, if you do identify a fundamental flaw or mismatch of the requirement and it hasn't been discovered until then, often at that point, it's got so far down the process, you get it in. The business has invested that much time and money into this, whatever it is, that the business are going to get it as it is. The business then have to suck it up and do a workaround because they can't now justify the cost of re-architecting back to where it needed to be to fix that problem.
That's what projects have so many phases. There was never a phase 2 on there until you have to fix all these things up.
Yeah,
Phase four.
and sometimes it can't be.
It also highlights the importance of the whole team working together pretty much from day one. It's not as if you can just, I guess
It's not silos.
we're talking waterfall now versus agile, I guess, where waterfall is where everyone's working in their own silo and it would just basically come down through the stack. But with agile, it's now a case of the whole team is engaged from day one to try and avoid the situation where you really haven't delivered something that's even close to what the business is really looking for.
I think I will miss the one role here, user representatives. Because now every day what we work is from day one, we get the user involved in the daily stand-up meeting to express what they want. At the end of the one cycle for sprint, the user could see a prototype. Previously, what they do is write down as a functional requirement, and the tester just test against the functional requirement, not test at the user's expectations. If the functional specification is not that accurate, means some part not really represents what the user's expectation, we cannot control it. We just can test against the functional specification. Now, we ask the real user to see the demo, to see the prototype. What's the function you have now? And the user is most likely visualize the people. People see the product, can express their ideas more clearly. So during these few iterations, we can get things right. We may not get things right at the first step, but after several iterations, people say, well, this is what I want.
That's right. You have the concept of a product owner who is like a sixth person that could have been on this panel, and the product owner is supposed to be constantly involved in the whole process, constantly demo or demonstrate what you've done to the product owner, so they're involved kind of at every possible stage. As soon as you've got something you can show them, and then they can feedback, this is right, this is wrong, I'd like to change here, and that happens very, very early on instead of very late in the process.
And I mean, as an architect, how well does agile development work in your organization? Do you use agile?
We do use agile. We use agile and we use sort of the more traditional waterfall approaches. And the best way to describe it, if you want to do a bit of research, is around something called bimodal IT, okay? Where what's been recognized over time now is that there's sort of two speeds that we can operate at. Agile way, as described here. Typically that's within our front-end channel type applications, things that the customer attaches like mobile apps or things typically on the front end, things you interact with. We can actually iterate and develop those systems quite quickly with an agile methodology. But when we get down to the large payment systems, a bank has got, or the electricity company, the core system, the ERP solutions around that, those are typically at a different speed. It's a very different methodology that we use for those users. There's typically large data migration activities involved and a range of other things that typically happens. So we make use of both, okay, to make sure that we do keep pace up in terms of delivering constant things. And it's a lot of checks and balances and controls that's built in, like the product manager or the actual end user who's participating in the agile space. The same checks and balances are even in our waterfall, more traditional type projects, that we do have checks and balances and make sure that we deliver around that. Architecture is quite interesting as well. There is nowadays methodologies associated with agile architecture. Okay. Instead of me creating a 500-page document, I create a 2-page document. I do it on the whiteboard instead of on a piece of paper, and I take a picture. Or a picture. I throw it to Heidi with a little airplane or something. So yes, there are agile ways of doing things. I think enterprise architecture is typically long-term planning, but if I do get down to solution architecture in the agile world, they are typically one team. Okay. and they do it on the fly as they go, using certain principles, patterns. Anyone heard of patterns? So patterns is sort of where the community, either inside the organization or the broader IT community, have developed certain patterns around, and patterns are nothing but best practices. So if I do, for example, security, and I can do it around security, but I can have multi-factor authentication, okay? So if you sign on to internet banking, you put your password, and then we give you another PIN to fill in, and another PIN to fill in, then your fingerprint, and scan your eye. That's called multi-factor authentication.
I'm still not sure it's really you.
No, we don't. So that those patterns, for example, multi-factor authentication, regardless of the technology that's solving, the community, especially the IT community, has started documenting these things in understandable language that we can just repeat. So if you really want to do things, especially with an agile perspective, you can actually harvest a lot of these best practices out there in the community and apply it very quickly. Okay? And that allows us a lot of flexibility because it's typically best practice that emerged out of the community how to do things.
At this juncture, I'd like to invite our audience to ask some questions. Our panelists are... Yes.
My question is for Katie. When you get the requirements and what forms you get the requirements, and you have numerous decisions to make while like during the start of the project, you might have to choose what platform do you choose for creating. You have numerous languages to choose from. You have all those things, and what's the first step you got to do when you get the requirements, and in what form do you usually get the requirements? They might be like in a model, like whatever, and how do you actually get the first step going? After that, it's just like, yeah, you know what you're doing, you got the plan, but it's hard on the first, like when you don't know anything, what platform are you going to use and how are you going to distribute your code, like that's what I want to ask.
Yeah, that's
Let's take it
there could be a very long answer to that, or sometimes the architecture defines platform and the language that you need to use. You don't have choice. It may be because you've got a pre-existing product. It may be because this is what the company says is the technologies that you should use.
Okay, it's okay. Like, because you might also be able to make a choice, like, do we need to use an existing solution? Do we need to create it from scratch? Like, there's another thing added. Like, there are numerous things to choose from.
Right. Well, generally, whether you create something from scratch or whether you create a new solution is not the developer's choice. It's usually the architect's choice.
Okay. And even the platform that you're using is not really a developer's choice.
It depends on what level you're talking about. So, I don't know. Okay, I guess I'm most familiar with the Java space. So let's say in a large company, then generally they will say, okay, in our company, which one way they may use WebSphere. They may be very much IBM, so they're going to want to use WebSphere or something else in the IBM suite. So there is no choice there. Okay, so that's your starting point. Then I may find that there's particular functionality I need to deliver that is new, and there may be a third-party product, whether it's open source or something I need to pay for, that I think would accelerate the process. So if that's the case, then I would go and research that, work out kind of the cost-benefit analysis, is it really going to do what I want, and then depending on the company, I may need to get approval to use that, or I may just be able to make that decision myself.
And in what form do you get the requirements? Are they like a model or something? Like, are they like, how do you get the requirements?
It depends. It very much depends. I guess sometimes you get a document.
And then like written form, like
written form, you might just get a Word document, and the Word document contains maybe use cases, requirements. It depends on what the process is of the company. The other end is where you're actually working from. So in the Agile process, you have user stories and tasks. So generally, you're delivered. The developer is given stories, user stories, and they're usually in an Agile project management system. So there are quite a few of those.
So what is story? What are they? I didn't get
The story is basically something like it's really just, it's from the user's perspective. So as a user, I would like to be able to log into the system. That's a story. And that's essentially what it is. It's like, as a user, I want to be able to log in. Okay? And then there will be a bit more detail, maybe to flesh out some specific requirements, like I want multi-factor authentication, so the 5-step thing that we own define. Or it may just be, you just need to enter a password and then you're in. Okay, so from that, so that's probably the level at which a developer will get the requirement.
So you just get the requirement to that extent. It's not really very detailed, like very much. For example, people might be creating a form. They might be placeholders, might not be placeholders. Like,
It depends on
that extent. Right?
There may be user interface designers involved, in which case I will actually have a layout for the user interface as well. So this is what the form is going to look like. This is, you know, the username goes here, this goes here, the button's here, the button's going to be green, it's going to be red, the text is going to be this on. Sometimes it's to that level, sometimes it's just, well,
you have got all options.
Make up with it yourself. Make that yourself. It depends on the company you're working for. It depends on the role.
It depends on the type of system that's developed as well. If I develop a payment system for a user bank, for example, there's no user interface. It's typically systems to systems that need to talk through this application. So the specifications could be in Word format completely. Where the UI application like internet banking, for example, or mobile app like GoMoney. What will happen is there's going to be UX designers that works with the business analyst and translate what it needs to look like, and you get a little different level of specification than associated with the as a developer they want to use.
And in the business-to-business case, one of the systems may already exist, and it may already have an interface defined that you absolutely have to work to. So that part of your requirements is just getting the interface specification, and that tells you how you've got to interact with the system.
And one important part of business requirement, you need to understand the business problems first. A lot of people want to jump in on the solutions before state the business problems. So first you need to understand the business context, what the problem you want to resolve, and then what's the context of this problem, and what the objective is.
But when it comes to developers, the problems and all are already discussed, and is it just the requirements mentioned, or it's just like are the developers decide the problem, like how what content? I'm just gonna like with the developers, they just get the requirements, right? Like they very specific requirements.
Quite often, the developer is also given how they're supposed to solve the problem as well. Like they get the full solution as a suggestion. This is exactly how you have to code it up, and all they get to do is basically write the code exactly to that.
It will fail. It will fail 100% of the time. All the developer does is do what's on that piece.
Developers usually send that back and say, look, I don't want to know what the solution is. You just tell me what the problem is and the requirements, and then I will solve it. Yeah.
There's a couple of artifacts along the way that A doesn't know about and B does. The business understand their workflow and they understand sort of what they have to be able to do. But they may not understand it in the context of every department within that business. So in ANZ you've got a whole bunch of different business units. And a business unit A might be demanding a problem, but they don't understand that business unit B actually has an output coming from that process as well. What the developer has is access to the code. At the end of the day, the rub hits the road when you do an impact analysis on code search and you find out absolutely everywhere there's a touch point. Even then you don't get it right because there's still business context that overlays that. A business person does not have access to, or the inclination either, to go to a code search, to actually find out the connectedness. If a developer isn't actually thinking about the connectedness of this as I understand it, and what else? It's that constant what else? What don't I know? What does this connect to? What else hasn't been thought of? If you're not in that mindset, you will miss things. And it will not be successful.
The developer is the person who doesn't need to leave the house in the morning because they're thinking of all of the problems that are going to happen on the way. So,
the developer in more detail, there is no doubt that again, as I said to you, the problem starts off at a very general level and it gets down to very specific when it gets down to the testing and development. One of the things you talk about, traits and attributes, there is no doubt that there are different traits and attributes along the way that come into play. But it is traditionally developers, strong developers and testers are exceedingly detail-oriented. Everything they see, they break down into, but how's that going to work?
And not only that, but how is it not going to work?
Absolutely,
That's
absolutely.
right. 80% of code tends to be handling the error cases.
Which means the error cases are actually just life. It's just life.
And that's why the developer doesn't get to leave the house because they're...
I think what's very important here to understand is we portray different roles here, okay? But the most important thing, even with an agile methodology or waterfall, is that this team works closely together, okay? The more successful projects I've seen in any organization, I've been in a range of them, is where the developers actually involved up front. Not 100%, 10%. They get the context, they get the challenge. Today's world, technology is a disruptor, okay? It is a fundamental disruptor. The technologist, even the developer, can do things that the business has not even thought about, okay? And it can change the process, it can change the outcome of that solution as well. And so important in the whole process, as we go from what that idea is all the way to something that you actually put out there live so consumers can use it, is that the developers are playing a much more important role up front. The technologists are playing a much more important role up front as well. Okay? So although we're portraying here, you're going to get a document and just go off and do stuff, that should not be the case. It's more collaboration.
It's just the start.
Yeah.
Oh, can I get another question from the audience? Yes.
I would ask Priyank, enterprise architecture and solution architecture. I understand that solution architecture comes with a product which is like, let's say we have Microsoft, it releases a product and then it gives you solution architecture. What exactly do you do and how deep do you go in and how does it, how is it different from the solution architect as in, comparatively to the enterprise architecture?
100%. I think enterprise architecture is very much a discipline that's emerging out of large organizations. Okay? If I go to the small organizations, typically, as Heidi said also earlier on, you do tend to play a range of roles. Okay? As you go from that vague idea to something more specific that you actually code physically. Okay? Enterprise architecture, as I said in the beginning, is very for me much like urban planning, town planning. Okay? I take this whole Melbourne, that is the enterprise architecture role. I need to look at the problem, which is the organization, which consists of, so ANZ, how many applications are there? Large applications. Give you an idea. 5,000. Okay? That's the ones we know. No. But in the video live is no, I'm joking. Well, what I mean, there's large amounts. So each of these 5,000 applications, to give you an idea, represents buildings or houses or things in there. The network, the infrastructure, represents the roads, electricity, water, pipelines, everything between all these buildings. So each application, a house or a building or something. So you take our large Eureka Tower, that's, let's say, the core banking application of the bank, where all your accounts and balances and stuff are sorted. Okay? Now, enterprise architects look at that context. They make decisions where goes what, broad standards, as Heidi said. We're going to use Java, for example, for this front end. We're going to use Microsoft. We set the blueprint for how everything will be laid out. Because we deal with, in ANZ, we've got almost more than 5,000 IT people working there today. Okay? And we range from bespoke greenfield development to we buy a bunch of packages. Okay? That's coming from vendors. Okay? So the solution architect's role, in contrast to that overall sort of town planning, is to look at the Eureka Tower and actually design that building specifically. Now that building needs to slot in the CBD. Okay? There's rules in the CBD. You've got a block of land, so this big. Okay? I'm going to tell you need to use concrete because it's going very high up. Okay? It needs to be stable. So there's a bunch of rules that you work within, but you design that building. What it's going to look like, how do things flow in there, and there's different designers. I like to think of the CX designers, anyone that does design in here. they're going to look after the look and feel. Nice gold building, bit of color here, what the sort of shape and size. The more engineer, if you think of that building, the developer, the designer, they look at more the structure, how I'm going to build things, what the components is going to be associated with that. Those are all the decisions that gets made from both the developer or the solution architect, what the structure of that building is going to look like. Okay? And then finally you get the developers and they construct that building basically. And those roles vary. If I go and I build a house, okay, sometimes I can't afford to have an architect and a builder and this, and you might get someone who does all of that at one go. If you do something large as the Eureka Tower, you might be able to afford an architect, etc. So it varies. Solution architecture for me is a discipline and the principles typically a developer has. Okay? It also depends on the size of the problem that you're trying to solve. And sometimes you want different people to be involved. Okay? And as I said, there are various range of speciality roles. Okay? So even in the solution architecture space, with an ANZ, we specialize around information. Okay? Information has been a critical resource. There's a lot of methodology and discipline around information. Everyone knows what a warehouse is. Not the one we store our stuff in, but a data warehouse where we store all the information that's collected in the bank. And there's very much specialized methodologies and disciplines, both from a development to a solution architecture perspective, around how I structure, how I build that out, how I maintain it, etc. Versus security. Security is a big specialization, highly specializes to extent in security as well. And Heidi can tell you, it is becoming a real specialized environment as well. Okay? Versus the application, versus the infrastructure.
As I understand, enterprise architecture designs it once. So how long does he can carry his job? You just create a city and you say that this is Melbourne and this is how it would run.
Yes.
And the solution architect would actually run on those baselines which you have defined. So how long would you stay in the industry? I mean, how long you can carry on your job?
Very good. So,
What time is it?
So the good thing about life is things change. Okay? The good thing about
we keep knocking down those skyscrapers and building new ones.
Yeah. How long has the city have been evolving? Okay. If you look at Melbourne, it's been evolving over time. Okay, it's been growing. There's constant need to add new roads. Listen to all the debate about the roads. Okay? Tunnels and this and that and money. We don't have the money. Where do we get it?
Trains or bikes?
Yeah, trains or bikes.
Brian's in a job for life.
So the good thing about the enterprise architecture space is that organizations evolve. If you look at today's environment, ANZ is not standing still as a bank. We get disrupted by companies like potentially PayPal, all these things coming on the side. And we need to respond as organizations, okay? Melbourne needs to, as a city, needs to respond to expanding need of people, influx, tourists, all these things that happen in climate changes, and all of that has got different demands. So each year as I do that plan, and I look forward, each year I get to that plan again, the next cycle, I look at all those external influence factors and I decide, is this plan still going on the right direction? Okay. For example, security. I'll use security again. Security is a critical thing. In the past, we didn't have a lot of cyber criminals or things out there. Today, they're getting sophisticated. Everyone and anyone can be doing it. Okay. And we need to constantly evolve our thinking around it, what we do completely from a data perspective, application perspective, infrastructure perspective. We need to collaborate broader and build out the architecture associated with it, just not an application, but the whole city basically in this context. For ANZ, for example, and constantly changing the plans associated with it. Okay? And we don't do just the 5-year thing. Okay? Most of my time, because we've done the 5-year, it takes me a few boards. But we spend a lot of time on the 1 to 3 year. We really want to get down to something that is real for developers to execute on, okay? That's real for business, okay? And things that we can get more to that agile, because the more we plan, the better we are about planning, the more agile, because I can change now things much easier. I know the implications, consequences, everything associated with that. And it's good for the people as well. If you're an IT developer at, for example, ANZ or any other organization for that regards, is that you've also got a career, okay? And part of the planning that we do is to actually influence and create a view that we want to get 2,000 Java developers. We want this and that. And so we actually plan a session that actually influences the whole planning, what skills, what people, everything we do. And things change.
We have time for one last question.
Let me ask you.
Yeah. All right.
What's the minimum experience required when you start project management? Like, what is minimum experience required, and should the person be more of a business person or a technical person? And what is the typical skills of project manager? What are the typical skills of project manager?
I've found a lot of accidental project managers, and you've got those, and then you've got others that are only there's a straight answer we must have is this certification in this many years. We concentrate on the key attributes of what we see make successful project managers. I think we touched on quite a few of those in this discussion. It's about being really thoughtful in terms of being able to clearly communicate, and that's communicating to the project sponsor and the team, really managing, not really managing, being part of the team, serving the team. Because if you look at a project manager, it's not a typical management role. It's not, hey boss, this is what I've done. It is actually helping the team clear roadblocks. It is managing the expectation of the sponsor in the business. It's almost the piggy in the middle. It's actually not as good as it sounds as a title. It's hard work. So it is about being very strong in that interpersonal skill and communication. It is about being very organised. In terms of, is it more business, technical? I've seen technical people good at project management and non-technical people. I don't think there is particular preference. If anything, more business is usually very beneficial because the people you particularly deal with are business people.
So were you, when you started project management, what background were you in?
Well, I was the accidental project manager. So when I first started, I was helping to run the project office. So I was doing all the reporting, I was doing all the resource management and so forth. And as part of that, you are second in charge usually because you're supporting the project manager to be successful. So then being able to step into that role, then doing certifications after that I found was very useful because you get the practicalities. Doesn't mean that you have to do it that way. You can certainly get all the grounding around all the disciplines beforehand, but certainly having that practical experience is a big bonus to do that right up. You need to have some project experience, so usually you start off with, in any role, whether you're a developer or you're an analyst or you're an architect or you're a...
Whenever we see roles of project management and when we search for minimum 5, 10
years, so you have to have done roles within a project to understand, I suppose, the different roles that you must have in terms of forming a team and being successful. And then you're able to really appreciate what it takes to manage something like that. So I think it doesn't matter where you come from. I've done coding, I've done coordination in project offices, I've done some analysis, bits and pieces. And so a bit of an appreciation of the difficulties across the spectrum. I haven't done testing, so I can't say. Well, actually, no, I did YGK testing, just a little bit of that. So it doesn't matter in what discipline. What does matter is being really focused on quality outcomes as you go, and on the team, and really being strong internally for the team and externally as well.
Well, today we have gained a lot of insights and wisdoms from our panelists, and I hope that you find it beneficial to your career in the future. And let's give a very warm thanks to our president. Would like to say a few words.
Well, this has been a very informative session. First, I would like to thank the panel members again. We have some souvenirs for them. And also thanks to all the attendees. And I would like to let you know that we have an event. Our next event. Our next several paid projects and volunteer projects as well. The information and the venue, the date is going to be on the website. Well, I invite all of you to go outside and have some refreshment. And thank you again.
Please join us for some refreshments.